Hi and welcome back to my channel. It is that time of month to start anew or start afresh and leave the last behind. What am I doing? I'm talking about my September reads. I've read 53 books in September, which my average is 60 books a month, so it was a little bit less because the last week of the month was pretty hard for me. But 53 books still is over a book a day. Actually, it's 1.76 books a day, so I'm still reading, just not as much as I ordinarily do. So, what did I read as far as pages for the month? I read 17,609 pages. This brings my running pages for 2020 to 190,779. And just for comparison purposes, I have read 547 books this year. So when we look at last year, I read 538 books for the entirety of 2019. And so for this month going into October, today being October 1st when I'm making this video, I have read 547 books. So I will definitely reach 600 to 650 books before the end of the year. At least I hope I will. So since I read 190,779 pages for for 2020, I did go look at my Goodreads year in books, and I may link that in the description below so you can see it. I have read last year 180,770 pages, so I'm 10,000 pages ahead. Now, why all these numbers? Why start a wrap-up video with nothing but numbers? It's because I love numbers. Always have. In school, math was always my best subject, whether it was regular math or algebra, geometry, whatever. It's just something that I enjoy. It does not take my love of reading away. It does not discount somebody else who reads less, or it doesn't compare me to somebody who reads more. It's just what I like to read, and it's a way for me to set personal goals for myself so that I can see where I end up and how I do. And so that's why I like to start off these wrap-up videos with statistics. So another note I would like to make is I made videos for the first 3 weeks of September, but I did not make my week 4 wrap-up video because it ran dead smack into this month here in October 1st. So when I get to those books, I will talk a little bit more about those to give you a better summary of the last week of September. So I'm going to get started right now. I am definitely going to be referring to my notes because there's a lot of books and I want to give you the ratings of each book. Usually when I track my reads on Goodreads, I put them in numerical order from the first day of the month, and from the first day of the month would be at the bottom and it goes up into the last day of the month is on the top. So when I look at my notes, I'll be trying to give them to you in as close to reading order as possible. If you look at my blog post for October 1st, you'll see this wrap up and you'll see these stats or these ratings that I'm about to give you here. But they're, like I said, they're in chronological order from the 1st to the 30th or from the 30th to the 1st, however you want to look at it. So to start off, I read a book that is different than what I usually read because it does not fit into any genre that I read, and that was the 60-second Brain Teasers, the Crime Puzzle Edition. I did read another 60-second book, and I'll tell you about that in a few minutes, but this was a Crime Puzzle Edition, and what they were is little paragraphs that were called teasers, and you had to read this little paragraph and solve the crime. Whether it was a murder, a stabbing, a robbery, or whatever, you had to solve it with very few clues. This was a cute little book. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars, and I do intend on buying this one and the companion book that I'll talk about in a few minutes and put this on my shelf. I think this book would be great for car rides. It would be good for Zoom. You know, right now a lot of us are still sheltering at home, so this would be something fun to do with somebody that you're on the phone with, on a video with. So I did enjoy it, and like I said, I gave it 4 stars. I also read my longest book of the year, which was To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini. Now I am going to just click over to my spreadsheet because I realized that the notes that I'm working with right now, I did not include the authors' names. So I'm just bringing my spreadsheet up on my laptop, which is to my left, so that for the authors' names that I don't remember, I now have them in front of me. So to back up, for the 60-second brain teasers, that was by M. Diane Vogt, V-O-G-T. So I just want to clarify that. Now, I started to mention that I read To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, which I gave 5 stars to. Now, this was pure science fiction, which is not one of my genres, but I'm in one of my Facebook groups. Well, in one of the Facebook groups I'm in, people were talking about this book coming up on NetGalley, which is the review site where I get most of the books that I read. So I saw that it came up as an audiobook and I decided to get it. Let me tell you, first of all, it was 880 pages, so therefore the audiobook was, I think, 32 hours. So I was going to listen to this book at 2 speed, 8 hours a day, which would have been 4 hours a day over the course of 4 days. Well, that certainly did not happen, because this book by Christopher Paolini was so good that other than sleeping for 6 or 7 hours in between, I listened to this thing in 2 sittings, maybe 12 hours, then I slept, and then I listened to the remainder of it. It was very, very good. It was about a woman who her job was to go to different planets to see if they could be colonized for people on Earth. And in the process of examining an island, I said an island. Did I say an island? A planet. She was overcome by an alien force, which was a dust that enveloped her and changed facets of her being. And she spent the majority of the time in the book trying to outsmart the alien to get this alien out of her system and to get back to who she was, and all the while try to save the fate of the human race. So I thought it was a very, very, very good book. I now am not so afraid to look at science fiction because there's a lot out there that I'm sure I would really enjoy. Okay, so the next book I read was The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna. Now, I have The Four Winds, I believe I read The Great Alone as well. So I believe The Four Winds won't be out until February. I did not jot down the months that these books will be out. But when I learned about Kristen Hanna sometime in January or February, I made a goal to read all of her backlist titles. So when The Four Winds came up on NetGalley for review, granted it's not until next year, I had to read it. I absolutely love Kristen Hanna. Her writing is really, really good. This book here was about the Dust Bowl and the Depression, and it showed how desperate people were back in the 30s in America. This particular book started off in Texas. A woman took her 2 children and they fled to California, which had more opportunities for them, but it proved to be very, very problematic and very, very difficult, but they did manage to make it, and it was an excellent, excellent read. Again, like I mentioned, it's not due until February, and I've already written the review, but I have a feeling I'm going to be rereading this before February. Then I read Final Second, singular. That was by John Ryder. I read this for a blog tour. This book won't be out until the middle of this month, October, but I read it the first week of September. It was a very, very good book, and I gave this one 5 stars. And if I didn't mention, I gave The Four Winds 5 stars as well. The next book I read, and it's an October book. I think it will be out on the 3rd. Or did it come out? No, it came out September 30th, but I read this book on September 3rd, and this was Lethal Temptation by Kaylia Cross. I recently joined her street team, so I was able to read this book early. I enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. It's the second book in a series, but I didn't have time to read the first book, but I will follow the series when the third book comes out. The next book I read was Before Nightfall and if you see me looking to the left, it's because in my notes here, I only put the ratings and the books, but not the author's name. I read actually Before Nightfall by Kat Martin, and I also read The Ultimate Betrayal by Kat Martin. And the reason that I read Before Nightfall is because Ultimate Betrayal was the next book in a series that I had already started, but I didn't get Before Nightfall read. So I read both of them, and I'll put both of those screenshots up here on the video at the same time. I gave both of those books 4 stars. Then I read Behind the Red Door, and this was by Megan Collins. This was a nice thriller, a psychological thriller that I was able to enjoy. I also gave this book 4 stars. And then I read The Love Scam by Mary Janice Davidson. Now, I haven't read Mary Janice Davidson in a good 10 years. So I did get 2 of her books on NetGalley, and this is one of them. I read it, I enjoyed it. It was a cute story, and I was able to give it 4 stars. The next book I read was Paradise Cove by Jenny Holiday, and I read this as an ebook, but I do have the print book in my living room on the bookshelf, but I didn't bring it in here. This was a really good read, and I gave this one 4 stars. Now, I mentioned that I love Kristen Hanna, so I went into her backlist and I read The Great Alone. I gave it 5 stars. I had The Great Alone in my TBR for August, but I never got a chance to read it, so I did read it I think it says the 5th of September. The Great Alone was a really good book. It was about a family of 3. The husband and wife were high school sweethearts. They were really in love, but the man went off to war. He became a Vietnam prisoner of war. So by the time he returned home, he had PTSD, which was really not diagnosed at that time. And he began to change, and he became very, very paranoid. So he found out about this place in Alaska where you can start over and be protected from all of the enemies that he felt were all around him and his family. So he takes them to Alaska, and when the mother is talking to the daughter about following her husband to Alaska, she tells the daughter, listen, if he hurt his back, we would still love him because that just means he's injured. Well, your father is injured in his head, and we still have to love him. So she follows her husband, and the book is written in pretty much in her perspective and in the daughter's perspective. And I believe the daughter was 13 or 14 when they went to Alaska. And the book carries on until she was a young woman. This was a great, great book. I really loved it. And like I may have mentioned, I gave it 5 stars. Then I read The Mistress, and I believe, I think this was Jill Childs, and I'm not reading. This is not in order, so yes, it was Jill Childs. I love this book. I gave this one 5 stars. It was a great psychological thriller. I love Jill Childs. This is maybe my 3rd or 4th book I've read by her, so generally her books get pretty high ratings from me. Now, I had mentioned earlier that I read 60-Second Brain Teasers, the crime edition. Well, I read another one, and this was the pencil edition, which was just pretty much quick little teasers, quick little questions. Like, for example, it could be 5 kids went to the store and they each bought an apple, and the apples came up to $5.20. How much did each apple cost each person? So those type of teasers were in this book. It was pretty good. I gave it 4 stars, and I do plan on buying it for future reference, just to kill some time, or if I say go to the doctor and I want to stick something in my purse besides my Kindle or my phone. The next book I read was A Witness to Murder, and this was by Verity Bright. I believe it's the 3rd book in a series. It's a cozy mystery series. I enjoyed the other books. I really like this one. She's a little bit older, a little bit more seasoned, but she becomes an amateur sleuth, and I love cozy mysteries anyway, so I've been enjoying this series, and I enjoyed this one, and I gave this one 4 stars. I then read Their Silent Graves by Carla Kovacs, and I don't remember what number this is in a series, but I have read the other books in the series, and I really enjoyed this one, and I gave it 5 stars. Now, I needed a book that was set earlier in time, so I chose The Witness by Sandra Brown. Now, I have maybe 9 or 10 of Sandra Brown's books in Audible, so when I needed an older book, I just looked on Audible for Sandra Brown because I knew I would find something, and I loved it, and I gave it 5 stars. I also needed to read some type of a fantasy book for one of the challenges I did. So I chose The Rogue Princess. That was by B.R. Myers. It was a take on Cinderella, but it was a sci-fi take. I gave it 4 stars. I did enjoy it. Basically, it was a reverse, it was pretty much a reverse gender retelling of Cinderella with a sci-fi take. Very, very good book. I did enjoy it. Then I read Into the Burning Dawn, and that was by Natalie Meg Evans. It was a historical fiction book. It was a really good book. I gave it 4 stars. It was a little, some of these books are getting harder for me to read because I'm very emotional, and so this book really did bring tears to me, just like the Kristen Hanna books did, for that matter. But it was a very enjoyable book. I did read a couple of Janet Ivanovich books because I'm trying to read through that series, and this one was 4 to score. It was really good. I loved it. I gave it 4 stars. Now, I did read another one I'll tell you about in a few minutes, and I liked that one a little bit more than I enjoyed 4 to score. And then I read Christmas Witness Conspiracy by Maggie Black. I read that on September 8th. I really enjoyed that one. I believe that's for an upcoming blog tour, so that review is already written. By the way, unless books were older books or for a challenge, most of these reviews are already written. If they're not on my blog now, they're scheduled on for upcoming reviews. And if I didn't say that already, I gave Christmas Witness Conspiracy, which I gave 4 stars to. I read What Became of Us by, I think, Anna Mansell. It was a heartbreaking, emotional story. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. It was one of those books that makes you cry a little bit, but always makes you glad that you had a chance to read it. And that's how I felt about that one. And then read The Ex-Boyfriend, and this was by Rona Halsall. This is also for an upcoming blog tour. No, I think I just posted this one on the 30th. This was a good 4-star book for me. It was a psychological thriller. It had some really good twists and turns. I really did like that. Then I read the first of several in-depth books in the month of September, and this one was Secrets in Death. This was really good. I have to be honest, just about every single J.D. Robb book gets 5 stars from me. They're very, very, very good books. I really loved this one, and I'll tell you about more in a few minutes. Then I read Orphan X, and this was by Greg Hurwitz. Now, I think it might be The Stepbrother or something. I have a book of his that comes out in February, and I hadn't read any of his books, but I have some of his books in my other room in hardcover. So once I got the newest book, the February title, which I'm also getting in hardcover, by the way, I decided to go back and to start this series from the beginning, which is the Orphan X series. So I read the first book, and I did read another one later in the month. This was a really good book, a great start to the series, and I gave it 4 stars. Now, a nice standout book for me that I read during and I think I'm moving into my second week, was Ties That Tether by Jane Igharo. Now, I don't have that right in front of me, but I do remember this one clearly. This was a really good book. It was about a Nigerian woman whose parents moved to Canada, and I think she was 11 years old when she was 11, and her mother, who was a very controlling Nigerian mother, was trying to set her up to marry a Nigerian man. And no matter what this woman did, how good she was, how successful she was, her mother still was very, very much pinpointing her life and trying to set her future. Well, things did not turn out well for what her mother expected of her, because she fell in with a man who was certainly not Nigerian. She ended up pregnant, and everything in her life took a different turn. This was a very, very good book. I don't think it's out until December 29th, but it was a really good book. I will probably do a video review of this book closer to publication date. I then read Little Bones, because in Little Bones was by S.V. Peacock. We're doing a group discussion of Little Bones in one of the groups I'm in. So we did a discussion on the first, I think, 5 chapters of this book already, but I went ahead and read it in full. This was a really good book, very, very intense, almost a thriller. Well, it's a thriller, but it's kind of almost a horror, which I don't read horror at all. So this was a very, very eerie book, something that gave me a couple of nightmares, but I do look forward to future discussions in that group with this book. I read another, by the way, I didn't mention, well, I told you about Ties with Tether was about a Nigerian woman, so it was a person of color book, or an Own Voices book. Well, I read another Own Voices book, and this one was A Spy in the Struggle. This was by Aya D. Leon. I did not really like this book. I gave it 2 stars. I'm trying to read more Own Voices book. I wish I liked this book a little bit more. To tell you a little bit about it, a woman was a whistleblower, and she was an attorney and just got hired, and she became a whistleblower and lost her job. Well, the FBI swooped her up, and they put her on an assignment undercover, and she was to try to suss out or flesh out a possible terrorist attempt. And I just didn't really like the book. I wasn't crazy about the character. I didn't like the side characters, and it was not one of my favorite books. I may look a little different in appearance and even in location. I can see my Kindles behind me because I worked on my puzzle in the middle of editing to kind of give myself a break. And while I was editing, I realized that I left out HighFive by Jenna Ivanovich. I really wanted to include this book in this video because it followed A Spy in the Struggle in my reading genealogy, so to speak. It was the next book after I read A Spy in the Struggle. And I wanted to mention this because I like the change in Stephanie, and it's the Stephanie Plum series by Jenna Ivanovich. I think there's 21 or 25 books, and this was the 5th book that I wanted to mention because Stephanie is changing a little bit. She's maturing a little bit more, and her love interest is evolving, and I like the shift that the series is already beginning to take. And I've even already downloaded the 6th book in the series, which is Heart 6. And so I just wanted to throw this book in there since I neglected to do so when I made the original video. So you will see it transitioning into the video that I'm uploading right now. Thank you. Then I read Under Violent Skies by Judy Dakin. I gave this 4 stars. I got this for a blog tour, so I don't think this book was on NetGalley, but I got a widget. I read it for a blog tour, and I really enjoyed it. The next book I read, and I read this book only because I needed a book, this particular book, for one of the challenges, was Mexican Gothic. Another book that I didn't really enjoy. I did give it 3 stars. I know people that I've talked to that have given it 1 star. It wasn't my favorite book, but it wasn't altogether horrible, which is why I was able to give it 4 stars. Then I read The Birds That Stay by Anne Lambert, and it went live on my blog today, October 1st. I read it on September 14th, but I waited until release date. This was a really, really good book. I loved it, and I gladly gave it 4 stars. And then I read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I read 7 in-depth books pretty much in a row, with the exception of 1, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. The first 6 books I read, and I'll say them slowly. I gave them all 5 stars, and as I say them, I'll just pop the screenshots up on the, in this video. The first one was Dark in Death, 5 stars. Golden in Death, Then I read Vendetta in Death, and I'm only pausing long enough for a screenshot to appear. And then I read Connections in Death. Most of these are being reviewed by me for my blog and for Goodreads. Then I read Leverage in Death, and then I read Shadows in Death, which came out on September 30th or September 3rd, September 30th. Now, I was going to go on to Faithless in Death, which I did read, but I read something else just before that. So I'm mentioning Faithless in Death now. And those were the 7 in-depth books that I read during the 3rd week of September. Excellent books. Of all of them, Shadows in Death was my favorite. I loved them all, but there was something that really stood out in Shadows. I love the insight when it really gets into the nitty-gritty of Eve and Rourke's relationship and what ties their marriage together, and looking at their past and how their past made them the people they are today. Those books, obviously the cases and the murders that Eve solves and that Rourke helps her with are really good. The side characters like McNabb and Peabody, that's all really good. But when a book really gets into Rourke and Eve's relationship and what makes it tick, and how Eve looks up to her friend and therapist and the profiler, Dr. Mirror, and when she looks into their marriage and sees what they have a couple of decades into their marriage and what she and Rourke might have, that's why I really like Shadows in Death. But like I said, I also read Faithless in Death. Nothing wrong with it. Another 5-star book. It just wasn't as impressionable on me as Shadows was. The next book I read, which was a very early read, was An Eye for an Eye by Carol Wire. I really can't talk much about the book because it hasn't been released on NetGalley yet. I can show you the cover because the cover was revealed. It was a great 5-star book. I don't think it comes out until February, so it might not get on NetGalley for a while yet. So I can't really tell you much about that book other than tell you that it's the first book in a new series, and I gave it 5 stars. The next book I read was Thursday's Bride. I'm trying to find it. Yes, by Patricia Johns. I loved it. I love Amish romance, and this book actually had a couple of different stories in it. It was a single book. It wasn't an anthology, but it did have 2 stories in it. Very enjoyable book. I gave it 4 stars. My next few books were actually all 3-star books, and that's 3 of them. The first one was By a Bullet by Greg Hurwitz. There was nothing wrong with the book other than the fact that it was only like an 86 or 90 page novella, and it just, it was a quick story, nothing wrong with it. Crime, solve, conclusion. But it moved me ahead in a series that I want to read more of. Then I read Furthermore, which was a fantasy. I really did not enjoy that book very much. Furthermore was by Tahara Mafi. I do want to read more by her. There really wasn't much wrong with the book other than it's just not a genre that I really enjoy reading. So I haven't quite acclimated myself to all the world building that takes place in a lot of the fantasies. And that's the only reason that book only got 3 stars. I thought my next book was a 3-star book, but I was wrong. It's a 4-star book, and it was Fearless by Fern Michaels. I had this book in my TBR for 2 or 3 months, and I'm glad that I finally got a chance to read it. I think I've already written the review, and if I have, it's already on my blog or scheduled to post on my blog. Now, I got a book by Faye Kellerman, and I think I may have mentioned this on my channel already, for February, and it's part of the Peter Decker Rena Lazarus series. So in order to prepare myself for the upcoming book, I needed to catch up on this series, which years ago I read the first 5 or 7 books of that series. So I read Serpent's Tooth, which is really good, and I gave this one 4 stars. My next book was a 5-star book, and it was called Confessions on the 745 by Lisa Unger. In the description, it mentions that it's a takeoff from Strangers Over Train, and that's exactly what it was, but it went left. It went in, or should I say it went right. I think when something goes left, it's not so great. But it really was good, because even though it started off with the premise with two women sitting side by side on a train, revealing something secret about their lives, and then something happened with one of the women's nanny who disappeared. That's when the story shifted and changed and came up with a lot of twists and turns and red herrings. And it caught me by surprise, because sometimes when I read thrillers like this, I can catch the killer, couldn't do it, or should I say the bad guy, because it's not always a killer. But I was really surprised by this book. I loved it, and I gave it 5 stars. The next book I read was Alaskan Christmas Redemption by Belle Calhoun. That is for a blog tour coming up, so I read this a little bit early to try to be ready for the blog tour. I enjoyed it, and I gave this one 4 stars. The next book I read was How to Speak Cat, which is called A Guide to Decoding Cat Language. How to Speak Cat was by Alina. Let me see if I can scroll down. I'm sorry, I just lost it. How to Speak Cat was by Aline A. Newman. I gave this book 3 stars. I got this book because I wanted to see if there was anything I didn't know about cats. I've always had cats ever since I was a teenager. So anything that this book talked about, I pretty much knew. I mean, I love the fact that it talked about pterodactyls, because I have 2 cats, they're brothers, named Milo and Toby. Well, Toby is a pterodactyl, so I'm glad the book talked about that. And that simply is a cat that has extra toes on his paws. So most cats have 5 and 5 on 5 on the front, 5 each on the front, 5 each on the back. But Toby has 8 and 8 on the front, and 7 and 7 on the back. So I did like the fact that it talked about that. Then I read No Fear, and No Fear was by Casey Kelleher. This was a crime thriller. It was very, very good. I gave this one 5 stars. And I also read another crime thriller that I gave 5 stars to, and this is Ruthless Girl, which comes out in October or November. And it was by Emma Talon, and it might not even be out until December. I'm not sure when it's out, but once I got the book, it was almost... There's certain books that when I get them on NetGalley, I totally reshift my TBR and move something out the way. So Ruthless Girl was that book for me that made me reorder my TBR. This is the 7th book in a series about a crime couple. Okay, Anna is the girl that is always the focus of each book, and she is with somebody named Freddie, and they've been through ups and downs, backwards and forwards. He's a crime boss, and she's his girl, but she's her own woman, and she's a strong girl. Great book. I loved it. Actually, we're getting to the end of this, and I want to see how much time. 31 minutes. I'm sorry this is taking so long. The next book I read, and I did push this to the front of my TBR because my friends were talking about it on one of my Facebook groups, and this was First Date, and this was by Sue Watson. Any Sue Watson book I read has always been good. This one was no different, and this was basically about internet dating. A woman found a guy online. It looked, not internet dating, but like, I don't know what it's called because I've never done it, but it's when you match yourself with somebody that you meet online. So I guess online dating. So she meets the guy. Their first date was perfect. He met every expectation she could want in a man. Every dream that she had, he had too. So they hit it off quite well from that first date. That first date took them to hell and back, and it was a really good book. Then I read Home for the Baby's Sake, and this was by Christine Rimmer. Very, very sweet book. It was basically about a guy who fell in love at first sight. He was a single father. He lost his wife. I think she died when she had the baby. And he pretty much has to convince a woman that she is his future bride, and it was a very cute story. My next book I read was Last Girls Alive by Jennifer Chase. This was a very, very good book. I gave it 5 stars. The only thing was I didn't feel well, and it took me 3 days to read a book that should have taken me 5 hours, but sometimes it happens when I don't feel well, and that was Last Girls Alive. Very, very good book, a good crime thriller. It seems that I'm reading a lot of crime thrillers these days. 5 stars. And the last book that I read was another crime thriller, and I just lost it, and it was by Ellery. Give me a moment. This was by Ellery Kane, a new author to me, and this was called Watch Her Vanish, a 5-star book. I read this on the 30th. I gave this 5 stars, as I just said, but I like this book because it's the first in a series. You meet 2 protagonists who are pretty much as different as night and day. They clash, but as the story develops, they end up kind of working on the same side. And I really, really want to read more in the series. I don't know when the next one will be released, but I know I'm going to enjoy it. Now, I did mention at the beginning of this video that I would talk more about some of the books that I read because I didn't do a wrap-up of the 4th week. And I forgot to do it, but I think I did it anyway because I talked about Watch Her Vanish a little bit, talked about Last Girls Alive. Well, I really didn't talk about it. Last Girls Alive was basically about a girl that was found murdered, and I am backtracking because I didn't do a 4-week wrap-up or a week 4 wrap-up. It was about a girl who had been killed, and it turned out that when she was a teenager, she was in a girls' home for wayward teens or wayward girls, and they're trying to stop a killer before he kills any more girls from that home. But as it turns out, sadly, more than one girl from that home was killed, so the detective is trying to find out who that was. I could talk more about No Fear or Watch Her Vanish, but I'll leave that to maybe some video reviews of those titles. And I have to kind of figure out if I'm going to do a week 4 video and then 2 or 3 days later do a wrap-up video at the end of October. So I'm not quite sure how I'm going to handle that this time next month. But that kind of wraps up the last week of the month and it wraps up the last of the books that I read for the month of September. So that's it. I've got to now edit in every single book cover. And I probably will edit in the star ratings that I gave these books. I want to thank you for all of your time, and I will be back next week with more wrap-ups. Bye-bye.